Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Grow2Market podcast. We've been away for a little while, actually, but during this rather long hiatus, we've been really busy working with clients and gathering lots of insights to share with you here. And I'm really delighted to say that Barry is joining us today. We've got a session today focused on data and decisions and what's really holding you back from growth in your business. So this is part of our series that we're really focused on helping founders and senior managers really get to grips with the key topics that are going to help their business grow. So before we get into all that, I'd like to introduce Barry, and if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Absolutely. Thanks for the welcome, Tim. I'm Barry Dewey. I'm founder of Pithy Digital, but also now working as the Chief Commercial Analytics Officer at Fractional Teams. So I have a 30-year history, which I will try and succinctly summarize. I started 10 years in the banking world, before 20 years in telecoms, but there's a common theme of 30 years of data that brings that all together. So my background and experience has always been about translating underlying data into meaningful outcomes. So that's more the focus and obviously the real key thing of what we're doing at Pithy and with fractional teams.
Fantastic, thanks, Barry. And of course, we worked together in the past, so
Indeed.
we've known each other for quite a while now. So it's great to have you join us and work with our clients as well. It's a great additional thing that we can bring to our business. So it's really great. So let's get started. And I think one of the questions I'd probably like to kick us off with is it's about when founders or senior management tell you that, well, they claim that they're data driven. What do you think they usually mean by that? And also, where does that break down in practice?
It's a good opening question, and obviously has a lot of wide implications. I think it's very much. I would say two key things to kick off. The first is, I think it's quite in vogue to say that you're data driven. I think there's a cultural part to it. I think people like to be seen or known within the market that they are data driven. So I think it becomes somewhat of it's a very easy expression to make. But when they talk about it, I think generally they like to see themselves as having have the decisions that they're making are evidence based. Yeah, they're not just making it on a whim. They're not doing it from gut feel, but they've actually based it on some underlying facts. And so I think it's that what's driving them. And as I say, returning to the first point is that at the moment, data is very in vogue. And so it becomes a very easy expression to have to say, oh, yeah, we're a data driven organization without really understanding the ramifications of what that means.
Yeah, it's almost like this AI thing, isn't it? People say they're AI powered, or they want to implement AI without really understanding the
Yeah.
ramifications, how it will actually help their business, what might go wrong, what could go right, even. And I guess that's kind of the point as well with data driven. And data, of course, feeds AI. So the two topics are kind of linked, maybe. But um, where do you normally find that people's use of data or their idea of what they have in terms of data? Where do you feel that breaks down in practice?
The, the starting problem is the foundations of data. Yeah, the foundations of data. If you have the right structures and you're capturing the right information, then of course you can look to empower that. Yeah, and so the first part of where it breaks down is fundamentally that people just start on capturing the right data in a consistent manner. Once they are capturing information, second critical factor that's causing them problems is the accountability. Yeah, it's very, very easy and become infinitely easier in the modern environment create additional fields. You can create I mean, I'm sitting here today that how many different applications, how many different reservoirs of information can you create? But you need accountability for your data, and especially the key data that, your the critical information that's going to drive your business. You need to have accountability for that. And I think that's a fundamental flaw where people always want, or companies always want to start running before they walk. Yeah. And so they get ahead of themselves, and they're so focused on getting the outcomes that they don't do enough of the preparation to ensure that they've got a solid foundation on which to build it. It's a stupid analogy. A lot of my analogies always focus around running. It'd be like, I ran marathons in my time. It'd be like me trying to run a marathon, not having ever run anything before. Yeah, you need to do the short runs. You need to do the work in order to graduate to running a marathon. And it may sound crass, but I think it's the same with data. You need to have the basics in place in order to build that, have that bedrock that you can then build on. And then once you've got that solid foundation, then hopefully you can really start to leverage the power of that into more meaningful outputs. And especially you touched on AI. You know, we see enough of it on LinkedIn now, and people are really starting to challenge the whole AI principle on the basis that, it will just give you more of the same. So if your foundations are wrong, it will just propagate back to you more of what is already wrong. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was quite interested to see that the UK government is now starting training in AI, and one of the areas that I wanted to focus on is for content production. And my first reaction was, yeah, that's all we need, more AI content producers.
Yeah.
But then I kind of thought maybe it's a good thing actually if they're able to train people to understand that you can't just write a prompt into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, write me a blog post."
Yeah.
To maybe you can use AI in a better way to produce better content, and maybe that foundation is data, like you
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. I
Yeah,
mean, to me, that it's having that solid anything else you can't. And if I go back, God, yeah, as I say, if I go back to my starting point in the investment banking world, yeah, I started investment banks 30 years ago. 30 years ago, we didn't, I mean, in no word of a lie, it was green screens. I didn't have the internet. We didn't even have anywhere near the capabilities that we have today. What they did have, even 30 years ago, and the first organization I work for is now one of the largest, if not the largest investment bank in the world, is they had that accountability to data. And having that accountability to data was absolutely now they worked in an environment that you had to have that. The volume of transaction that they were doing, you had to have the systems, you had to have the accountability. But no word about, I used to walk a trading floor getting somebody to sign off on a piece of paper every single day. And obviously, you don't
wow.
necessarily need that same level of rigor, and depending upon your business, depends how you implement that. Yeah, but you still, that's where I think so many organizations, they're so focused on the output, they're so focused on the here and now. Oh, this is what we got to produce. But the reality
Yeah,
is, a lot of this stuff is going to be produced daily. It's the same thing. The only thing that's changing is the lens that you're looking at, the time frame that you're considering, or or
yeah,
or the or the kind of filtering that you're applying. It could be a graphical, it could be a sales region, the salesperson, but you
yeah.
still need that. You still have to have that fundamental premise of having that accountability.
That's it. That's interesting, and I think it's something that we find across marketing topics as well. Uh, the world is very execution focused, which is a great thing. There's lots of people out there who can do strategy and execution, and they can go in and get stuff done. And often I think people confuse the kind of more navel gazing aspect of strategy with actual preparation and research and building the data, which then allows you to do the execution properly. And I think people often think, yeah, we don't need any more research, but actually, yeah, you do in a lot of cases. So we in the marketing field, we end up building information like persona profiles and things like that to get an understanding of the nuances of different target profiles that we want to send emails to, or that we want to send social media posts to. But in a business, and I guess more the commercial side of the business rather than the marketing side, what are some of those key data points? I suppose maybe a growing business founder or say a senior person in charge of commercial, um, what are those key data points that they would really be interested in, that they want to really make sure they get right?
Yeah. So obviously every business is different, but the fundamentals, ultimately businesses are looking to understand, they only have so many levers to profitability. You know, they have the revenue lever, and they have the costs, and obviously how both of those are broken down, it will impact what it delivers in terms of profit. And so, a lot of focus for businesses is absolutely understanding that. From a revenue perspective, they tend to be should be hopefully relatively straightforward, in terms of what you're billing your customer, etc., and so forth. But then, if you extend that premise across, it becomes the associated information with it is actually what drives your ability to improve revenue or change revenue moving forward. From a cost perspective, I would say that it can be more challenging, because obviously costs, when it comes to external costs, if it's third party costs that you're incurring, again, as with billing your customers, your suppliers bill you, so you know what that is. Often the harder ones are the more intangible costs, and how you factor those in, and how you might factor those into the business. But
Yeah.
certainly from a business perspective, you know, my experience from dealing with customers has always been, people are too often looking for these silver bullet answers.
Yes.
And a lot of businesses are looking, and again, it's about the profitability, is to understand, okay, we've invested in this, what's the return on it? But to unfortunately, these things, certainly within the world of telecoms, which obviously has been a notable part of my experience, you know, telecoms companies are at best complicated. They traverse infrastructures, they traverse geographies, and so therefore to be able to provide that summer, it is challenging, because ultimately, so back to the question, is how you capture that underlying data will determine what you can report back. Yeah, so
Yeah.
taking a very simplistic example, you might have a project that traverses all sorts of geographies, but then how do you, depending how you capture your information from a revenue and cost perspective, how you then determine that and attribute that becomes massively complicated.
Absolutely. And I guess that having that, that you could have a lot of data, you could have a lot of data that you could surface, but I suppose it's getting to that point where what you have is good enough. And
100%, Tim. I mean,
yeah,
I would say, I mean, that, of course, everybody wants perfect data. Yeah, that's the panacea. That's the utopia that we all. It's like, oh, it's never going to happen. So it's like
yeah,
aspiring to a perfect market. It doesn't exist. For me, I've always been very much about the 80-20 rule in terms of this stuff, and data at a level, has to be the same. Yeah, you need to, if you get the if you can get the 80% with 20% of the effort, that gives you 80% of the effort to have a look at the remaining 20. But as long as you have some broad, again, if you go back to the accountability part of it, if you have that, if you have a decent structure of accountability across the organization, then at least you've got a fighting chance with regard to the data. The other point that I sort of occurred to me as well is that, and one of the problems that we have with regard to the data side is what too often people have already they already know what the answer is, yeah, or they think they know what the answer is, and so what they're trying to do is shape the data to substantiate the particular argument that they're coming up with, which again is putting the cart before the horse. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you already know the answer, we'll just run with the answer. You don't need, just you're wrapping it up to give you the thing. I mean, I wear an Apple Watch. Bring it back again to a running analogy. It'd be like me wearing the Apple Watch, going for a run, coming back, going, "Oh, that was the best run I've ever done," and then looking at the watch and going, "Well, it started badly, it got worse," and where you derive the benefit and the value is actually scrutinizing and being honest with yourself, being transparent, and looking without bias at the actual at the evidence, and then
Yeah.
determining a plan of how you improve that, and then you can do it. If you don't want to take that approach, then fine. Of course, you can carry on playing back the narrative that says I'm running brilliantly, and you won't see any improvement as a result, and the data's the same.
Yeah, and this is something I definitely see with a number of times I've been in organizations where you've had this decision that just needs supporting evidence, let's say, and they're trying to build a data set around it, and I think that's when politics comes into play as well, because if you have stakeholders, senior management who absolutely want that decision, it could be backing a legacy provider that they happen to meet on the golf course once a year or something like that. There are these kind of situations where it's very hard to present real evidence or even gather the evidence, because I think often in organizations, some of that information doesn't get surfaced because people don't want it to get
Yeah.
surfaced. Would you say that's
I
true?
100%. You're completely right. I mean, look, there's multiple actors on everything, and that also stems to part of the problem. People start capturing something for one thing, and then time progresses, and then other people start using it, but then the data was never being captured for that purpose, and so you then have it, can be mislead, can drive them down a path that is not, because the data was never intended for that purpose. People, as you say, people have different stakeholders have different opinions, have different agendas as to what they want to get out of it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the typical scenarios you have is, if you have the usual sort of barriers between sales and operate, of course, the salespeople will go, if operations were delivering X, Y, and Z, then we're able to have more sales, and vice versa, and then the other way is then, oh, if sales provided X, Y, and Z, then we could operationally deliver on this stuff better. So it becomes a bit of a slangy match between organizations. To me, and going back again to from my experience, the big companies are big companies for a reason, and there are big companies are big because they take the emotion out of it. Yeah, they take the emotion out of it, and it's very, and it helps when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of transactions, because you have no other option. You have no other option to make it an industrialized set of processes. But you have that account, again, and I keep always come back to accountability. Yeah, people have that confidence in the data because it's consistent, and
Yeah.
you may not like the answer that it's coming out with, but it's being reported consistently. And so if you have that, then you can start to hopefully make progress forward. And also, ultimately, you want to be using data, of course, but to anticipate where the risks are, where the challenges are, where the potential upsides are. How, that, like I say, the market in the generally speaking, it's tough. Securing revenues are hard. Obviously there's a lot of focus around improving operational efficiency and reducing cost, but there's only so many levers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think for organizations, and my theme's always kind of systematic and cyclical in their type of mentality. But if you have that strong base, then that gives you the ability to be agile and to pivot when you need to pivot, and to go run in new directions if you have to, add new strings to your bow. A big part of scenario, too often people try to get so obviously you have your underlying data, but then you have the systems and everything that runs off the back of it. And people you hear a lot of talk now about sort of end-to-end processing and what have you, and they try to create this perfect, and for me, I've
The
always,
and all of that, yeah, sort of,
and
flawless
for me,
products.
the analogy I use for that is like the old sweater that you have, yeah, and you have like a thread that comes out of it, and sometimes you pull on that thread and it seamlessly just falls, or sometimes the whole bloody jumper falls apart.
Yeah,
And it's the same with date. To me, you need to make these things more modular, more manageable, because otherwise, if you make it too large, people just, it's like rabbit in the headlights. They don't know what to do. It's too much to consume.
exactly. And it's hard enough in some organizations to get people to fill in lead information in a CRM, or, update, they just call a lead on a new number to update that number in the CRM. So little bits of data like that, which are fairly minor but important from a sales perspective. They can completely throw the whole system off. And yeah, I agree. You need buy-in, and I think it's one of these typical cliches, but trying to boil the ocean is what a lot of organizations try to do. They bring in change managers, consultants, and things like that try to build a system without really having worked in those environments before. And I think they often have a developer comes in, but no one kind of in the middle that is able to translate business outcomes into what needs to be delivered internally. And we see that a lot. And it's definitely something that I think lends itself to the fractional approach. And this isn't just a pitch for what we do, but I think fractional leadership works well for that kind of stage of growth. You don't necessarily need a chief data officer when you're a sort of very early kind of 5 to 20 person startup scale up. You want someone who can come in and take an objective view. I think that point you made earlier about honesty. You want a truth teller. You want someone who's able to come in and explain what's going wrong. Not tell a negative story, but to tell the truth.
And often that's easier done with an external fractional resource, yeah, because it's like dealing with something in your family, yeah. If you bring another family member in, then of course they know history, they know the back, they know there's so much more intrinsically involved in it. Yeah, as a third party, you can be agnostic, draw and look at it with and play it with a straight bat, and give them give them those recommendations. But yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's an opportunity as well for the fractional pieces. Like you say, it's when you're a smaller organization, yeah, 100% you don't need, I mean, it would be a luxury to have that. But also your data and your MIS evolve. It's going to be you'll have periods where you need to apply resource to it. Yeah. And once you've got a framework, once you've got a set of standards, for a lot, and for most businesses, I mean, even in the investment banking world, yeah, actually the reality of those was it was high. It was just a high, it was the same thing, but massively high volume. So once you have the principle there, then it kind of at a level runs itself. So a fractional resource makes, because periodically you're parachuting, understand where you are in terms of the business, and deliver the requirement of what is there. And I think that,
That's,
like I like the boiling the ocean is 100% reality of so much of these things. You've got to really get the operational efficiency. You need to really scrutinize where you're utilizing resource. I've implemented. I'm not techie, but I've been involved in the implementation of APIs. Yeah, APIs again, yeah, can be absolutely, but so often are not appropriately applied. I had
mm,
people working for me back in the day. A pricing desk type scenario. Yeah, we had two people who were taking information from one system, plugging it into another to get a result, to then plug it. They were spending 80% of their week doing that. Of course, you're going to implement an API because it delivers a cost reduction because those people can be gainfully employed doing something more important.
yeah,
Secondly, the customer experience from a sales or from an end customer perspective, they got the answer back quicker and easier as a result of that. But
yeah,
it's looking at those repeat scenarios and
yeah,
applying the right solution to allow you. So getting people to well, maybe we're making it too hard for them to capture the information. Yeah. A lot
yeah.
of,
When
well,
work the
yeah.
friction in involved and deal with those individually and not try to overdo the
Yeah.
process.
I mean, telecoms is a great, but and I've worked in other environments on telecom, I mean, retail as well, EPOS systems, or whenever you're trying to create a digital version of a physical environment, yeah, it is challenging, and especially in many of these industries where the focus is all about the product, about the tech, about the cables, about the produce that the layout. So you work in a shop, they put in the stuff and how it's is it going to be
Yeah,
appealing for the all of those. That's what the thought's about. It's not about the data. It's not about the
yeah,
management of the data, and the issues that come of that. If you're working in the telecoms environment and you've got, what's the fundamental of all telecoms? You go into data centers, you've got racks, you've got thousands of cables. The management of that, how do you document that? How do you it's a minefield. It's a mind, but that's
yeah,
where things like AI are starting to come into their own because actually you build it in, and the mechanism that you utilize, the system knows more than it knows often. So it will
yeah,
know where you are. So if you came along with your digital camera and you took a photo of said rack, it knows where you are. You don't have to populate that you're in
yeah.
pop ABC because it already knows that information.
Takes out those little bits of manual work involved and that's key because I think so much time gets wasted on manual activity. And I think that's why a lot of people are scared of data maybe in some ways because they see it as being just pages and pages of reports and spreadsheets and things like that. And it almost feels like quite daunting. I something I remember was I used to be given these printed board packs. So I remember I used to go into the board meeting. I used to get given these printed packs and it would be about 50, 60 pages. And this is like incredible. And for a start, why are you printing it? Which that's a sustainability question more than anything. But the point though is more about this was data. This was just mountains of data, and people didn't know what to do with it. People just said, "Okay, this is," and in fact, it was kind of data rolled into reports, but there was nothing really actionable about it. And I guess maybe that was one of the things I wanted to touch on, which was what is that difference between data and the reporting of data, and then what is actually, let's call it decision ready insight, for example, something that is kind of actionable, basically. What's the difference between those two? Do you see much of a difference in some organizations?
Um, s- I think the react. Yeah, I think many organizations, like you say, they create decks, and they it's almost like a security blanket. Yeah,
Yeah.
in my mind, yeah, it becomes oh yeah, but we've got our reporting that we and as long as those metrics are trending to what we've set as our business plan, or our not, we can turn around and go, the customer experience is great because we've got no out, or whatever it is. Yeah, then as I say, it's that feel good factor. So too often I think it's the key part of where data is just data. Yeah, reports are just reports. The thing that differentiates, and I think this is part of the problem of the whole SaaS environment at a level, is SaaS has empowered everybody. Everybody can be an analyst. Everybody can be a
Yes.
data, and but back to, is you got it in order to get something actionable out of it. Yeah, you need to challenge it. You need to have a critical mindset that allows
Mm.
you to look at, and not just, if you've already back to the original points in the podcast, if you've already made the decision as to what the answer is, then actually a level data driven information isn't really needed for what you require.
Don't waste your time.
Yeah, exactly. Save yourself a huge amount of expense. Don't invest in the systems to capture it. Don't
Yeah.
employ data clerks to put stuff in. Just run with what you're going to do, and either the numbers are going to hit or they're not going to hit. But you think you know it all, and so therefore politely crack on.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's different, and that's one of the things I've seen, with many projects is, you know, the empowerment of the information needs to be with a kernel of people who really understand the underlying data of what's being fed into it, but also have the ability to critically review it, and to try and and so that will come out with, unfortunately, it will come out with the reality, and then hopefully some measures that can move you to a more positive state.
That's great. And I think it's really important that people do have that honesty. And maybe that just leads me to like a little bit of a conclusion almost, and maybe a final question, um, which is that we just imagine that you have got that founder, or maybe someone senior in a growing business, and they're saying, you know what, it's honestly time, right? Things aren't going as well as we'd like, or maybe we think things should be going better because our competitor over here has got product that's, same as ours. It's just as good as ours, but somehow we aren't quite, hitting the numbers that they're hitting. What's going wrong? So if you've got someone like that, what would you say to them? Maybe as one thing they could maybe do differently after watching this podcast. Is there something they could go away now and say, maybe take one step or do one thing a little differently? Apart from obviously coming along and taking advantage of our fractional services. But if there was something else, there's something that actionable in their business. What would you recommend?
I think the first steps, I mean, obviously having a, a clear understanding of potentially the KPIs that you're looking for. But to me, obviously the KPIs are one thing, but the more important, and it kind of goes back to it's that accountability.
Yeah,
The thing that they need to start to do is make people accountable. People have to take ownership. Yeah, and too often, especially and again in the sort of SaaS world, where you have a generic environment where people are plugging information, whatever the platform is irrelevant. But is you have this like collective ownership, but reality is it's no ownership, because everybody's pointing at everybody else and going, well, I thought they were doing that.
yeah,
And so you need to have that. Unless, it's like having the building blocks is the one thing, but then knowing who is accountable for those building blocks is even more so. So if I finish it, back to my original example back in the investment banking world, yeah, the investment banking world is has a very clear structure, a very clear ownership. You know who does Japanese yen,
Yeah.
you know who does euros, you know who does US dollars. And so you know who to go to. And if there was a problem with regard to those, you go and speak to those individuals. And it should be no different with your data. And certainly your senior leaders, if they want to have that, confidence, then you know who you want to be able to go to. And that isn't necessarily going to be your C-suite. Your C-suite is sat across too many things. They're not going to be down into the detail. Yeah, they're not going to be but they're reliant on the people within their teams to deliver that accountability so that they know they've got the confidence and structure to deliver back then the key elements back to the senior team that they're talking to.
And if that's not someone that exists in the business today, and if it's not something that can justify hiring as a permanent full-time role, then I guess that leads us back
Then all
to,
the better for us.
the fractional CXO makes a lot of sense in that. And that's great. Thanks very much, Barry, for all of that. I would just like to finish off by saying, obviously, fractional things is a business of many aspects of growth that we look after businesses. Everything from kind of marketing to sales. We are primarily focused on the tech industry and industries also adjacent to tech, and primarily on B2B. And certainly with Barry joining us, it's really adding that extra commercial capability, analytics capability that is something that we haven't offered in the past. We've had a lot of complementary services to go alongside that, but it's now something that we can offer in a complete package as well. So check out fractionalteams.com/pricing. So we've got nice, easy to understand packages with transparent pricing on there. So some little nice deliverables that will help you get started to get a good data foundation, maybe fix some problems that you've got with data. Or if you want something that's more embedded and part of the business, but without a lot of long-term commitment, fractional CXO might be the way to go. So yeah, thanks again, Barry, for joining us.
Thanks for the invite. And I look forward to the forthcoming projects and developing the collaboration over the coming years.
Wonderful. Thanks again. Cheers for joining me today as well. And I hope to see you all soon as well on the next Grow2Market podcast. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.